In an era before social media scandals, before camera phones caught every meltdown, the only way the public saw their favorite stars lose control was live.no filters. No rehearsals, just the raw, unpolished humanity of Hollywood icons who forgot, if only for a moment, that the world was watching. From egos colliding on primetime couches to confrontations so tense you could hear the audience stop breathing, these are the 12 most explosive Golden Age talk show moments that changed television and the stars themselves forever. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. 12. Frank Sinatra versus Johnny Carson, the chairman meets his match. When Frank Sinatra walked into Johnny Carson's studio, he expected the usual admiration, the bowing, the charm, the laughter that followed him everywhere. But Carson, the sharpest tongue in late-night history, wasn't in the mood to kneel before a king. When Sinatra joked that Carson should be honored just to be in his presence, Johnny shot back, "Frank, I'd be honored if you'd pay your bar tab." The audience roared, but Sinatra didn't. His grin froze, his eyes tightened, and for the first time on television, America saw the chairman lose his cool. It wasn't the words, it was the power shift. For years, celebrities controlled their image. But Carson's quip marked the beginning of a new era, where the talk show host held the throne, and no amount of fame could save you from a public checkmate. 11. Bette Davis versus Joan Crawford, the rivalry that wouldn't die. Decades after whatever happened to Baby Jane, Bette Davis sat beneath the hot studio lights, her wit as sharp as ever. When the host dared to mention Joan Crawford, a ripple of electricity ran through the room. Davis smirked. "She slept with every man in Hollywood except me." The audience gasped, then laughed, half in shock, half in delight. It wasn't just a feud anymore. It was theater. What made this moment unforgettable wasn't the insult. It was the vengeful poetry of it. Davis, unapologetically venomous, used live television as her battleground. Crawford wasn't there to defend herself, but she didn't have to be. The feud lived on because the world couldn't look away from two women who refused to bow to the system or to each other. 10. Orson Welles versus the BBC interviewer, the genius unleashed. By the time Orson Welles appeared on British television, he was weary of journalists who wanted to dissect him rather than understand him. When one interviewer accused him of arrogance, Welles leaned forward, smiled coldly, and said, "Would you rather I lie about being brilliant?" It wasn't arrogance, it was truth, and it hit like a thunderclap. The silence that followed was deafening. In that instant, television became something new, not a performance, but a battle of intellects. Welles, unfiltered genius, once considered dangerous, was suddenly magnetic. He didn't charm his audience, he challenged them, and they loved him for it. 9. Judy Garland versus Joe Frady, when vulnerability became power. Judy Garland was fragile, luminous, and brutally honest, especially when she was tired of pretending. During one late-night interview, when asked about her difficult reputation, she stared straight into the camera and said softly, "They called me difficult when I stopped saying yes." It wasn't just a quote, it was a revolution. In an era when actresses were expected to smile through exploitation, Garland's refusal to play nice turned her into something greater than a star. She became a mirror for every woman who'd ever been punished for having boundaries. The studio audience didn't know whether to clap or cry, and that's what made it unforgettable. 8. Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, Love, Fury, and Champagne. When Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor appeared together on a 1970s talk show, the world expected charm and wit. Instead, they got a masterclass in emotional warfare. The couple, Hollywood's most beautiful disaster, arrived tipsy and affectionate. But when the host jokingly asked who was the better actor, Taylor smirked, "I have the Oscars to prove it." Burton, not to be outdone, shot back, "And I have the drinking problem to thank for them." Laughter filled the room, but behind the humor was pain disguised as performance. The two traded barbs and kisses, insults and laughter. The audience was enthralled, watching two lovers who couldn't live without or with each other. It was chaos, elegance, and heartbreak rolled into one perfect storm of live television. 7. Marlon Brando versus Dick Cavett, the philosopher and the clown. Marlon Brando rarely granted interviews. When he did, it was an event.so when he sat across from Dick Cavett. Viewers expected the rebellious charm of a movie icon. What they got instead was confrontation. Cavett, known for his dry humor, tried to lighten the mood. "You've been accused of being difficult." True. Brando's face darkened. Difficult is what they call you when they can't control you. The tension was palpable. Cavett tried to pivot. Brando didn't let him. He began dissecting the hypocrisy of Hollywood, the exploitation of Native Americans, and the emptiness of fame. That IT wasn't an interview. It was an awakening. By the end, Cavett sat speechless. Brando had turned a talk show into a sermon about truth, and America realized that even the most handsome face in Hollywood carried the weight of rebellion behind it. 6. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, words as weapons. Before the rematch that would define them both, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier appeared together on live television. What was supposed to be light-hearted promotion turned into a verbal brawl for history. Ali taunted Frazier with his usual poetry, calling him slow, ugly, a gorilla. But Frazier, tired of being humiliated, snapped. He lunged toward Ali, shouting, "You're not funny, champ." Security stepped in before fists flew, but the damage was done. Millions of viewers saw the mask of showmanship crack. This wasn't just boxing, it was two men fighting for dignity, legacy, and the right to be remembered as the best. Ali's charisma met Frazier's fury, and for one unforgettable moment, sports became Shakespearean drama. 5. Norman Mailer versus Gore Vidal, the clash of titans, two of America's most brilliant, volatile minds. One stage, when Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal appeared together on the Dick Cavett Show, it wasn't conversation, it was combat. Mailer had recently headbutted Vidal backstage, and the air was electric with hatred. Vidal sat calm, composed, ready to humiliate his rival with words instead of fists. Mailer opened with an insult. Vidal smiled and said, "As usual, Norman, words fail you when you need the most." The audience gasped, laughed, then sat in awe as the two men dueled verbally like gladiators in tweed jackets. It was witty, vicious, and oddly poetic, a moment when television proved that intellect could be as dangerous as violence. For Lucille Ball versus Desi Arnaz, Love After the Curtain Falls. Years after their divorce, Lucille Ball appeared on television to discuss her legacy. When asked about Desi, the air shifted. She smiled wistfully. "We never stopped loving each other. We just stopped being able to live together." Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from honesty. For the first time, America saw beyond the laughter and sitcom perfection. They saw a woman whose success came at the cost of her heart. It wasn't scandalous. It was human, and it reminded millions that even the funniest people in the world cry when the audience goes home. 3. James Dean, the rebel without rehearsal. There are only a few surviving clips of James Dean's television appearances, but one in particular still burns in the collective memory that a young interviewer asked him, "What are you rebelling against?" Dean smirked, looked off camera, and said, "What have you got?" It was unscripted, instinctive, and utterly magnetic. That single moment crystallized the rebellion of an entire generation. Dean didn't need speeches or outbursts. His confrontation wasn't with a person, it was with the world's expectations. He turned silence into defiance, and in doing so, created a legacy that outlived him. 2. Katharine Hepburn versus Barbara Walters, the interview that shook feminism. When Barbara Walters finally landed the elusive Katharine Hepburn, it was supposed to be respectful, insightful. But Hepburn wasn't interested in playing polite. When Walters asked, "What kind of tree would you be?" Hepburn raised an eyebrow and replied, "I don't think about being a tree. I think about being a woman who's worked every day of her life." The audience erupted in laughter. But beneath, it was something deeper. A generational clash between two powerful women in a world that tried to define them both. Hepburn's response wasn't arrogance, it was defiance. She refused to be reduced to metaphor. She demanded to be seen as real. That single exchange became one of the most replayed moments in interview history, proof that intelligence could outshine charm, and authenticity could silence even the most famous interviewer alive. 1. Burt Reynolds versus Mark Summers, the slap heard round Hollywood. And then there's the moment that still makes jaws drop. When Burt Reynolds appeared on The Tonight Show alongside comedian Mark Summers, tension crackled instantly. Summers made a joke about Reynolds' messy divorce. Burt laughed, but it wasn't friendly. Moments later, he flung a glass of water in Summers' face. The comedian retaliated, dousing Burt back. The audience roared, half in disbelief, half in excitement. For a few chaotic seconds, one of Hollywood's biggest stars looked genuinely unhinged. But then, the impossible happened. They made peace. The two men ended up sharing pie on stage, laughing like schoolboys. It was absurd, hilarious, and oddly touching. A perfect metaphor for the Golden Age itself, messy, emotional, but never boring. Epilogue: when the curtain falls. The Golden Age of television wasn't polished. It was unpredictable, dangerous, and real. Before media training, before publicists curated every syllable, stars spoke from the gut. And that's why these moments still burn decades later. Because when perfection slipped, when tempers flared, when honesty cracked through glamour, we didn't see icons, we saw people. And sometimes that's the most explosive truth of all.